Hello, I'm in conversation here with Professor Kevin Dutton, a research fellow at Oxford University and author of The Wisdom of Psychopaths. Kevin, where do we find psychopaths these days?
Well, it's a funny question actually, I'll tell you this, because whenever people hear the word psychopath, instantly they start thinking of serial killers and rapists and suicide bombers or whatever. But actually when psychologists like myself use the word psychopath, we're actually talking about a very specialised group of individuals with a distinct subset of personality characteristics, such as ruthlessness, fearlessness, charm, charisma, focus, coolness under pressure, and of course that trademark lack of conscience and empathy. Now, if you think about those characteristics that I've just told you about as maybe being the dials on a studio mixing desk, which you can twiddle up and down in various combinations, you arrive at two conclusions. The first conclusion is that actually being a psychopath is not a black or white or nothing affair, but rather psychopathy is on a spectrum, rather like height or weight or IQ, along which each of us have our place. The second conclusion that you can draw from that is that there is no one definitive correct setting at which all these dials can be dialed up at. Rather, it very much depends on context, on the particular set of circumstances that you may find yourself in. Now, by the same token, if we extend that logic a little bit further, you can also say that there are certain professions out there which by their very nature demand what we might call some localised psychopathy, some precision engineered
what kind of professions are we looking at here?
Well, it's very interesting. I mean, in 2011, I launched something called the Great British Psychopath Survey. Now, the survey was unique. It was the first of its kind to assess the prevalence of psychopathic traits across the entire national workforce. Now, participants were directed onto my website where they completed something called the Levinson Self-Report Scale of Psychopathy, and they were then given their score. But that wasn't all. They also entered their employment details. So, what would turn out to be the UK's most psychopathic profession, I wondered, and for that matter, its least? Well, the results, when I finally got them in, certainly made interesting reading. Number one, CEOs came in at number one.
They're the most psychopathic.
The most psychopathic profession in the UK. Now, we'll come on to why that is in a short while, but let me go through a few of the occupations I can remember. Number two was lawyers. No surprise there, you might say. Number three was the media, in particular TV and radio. And
as in journalists?
That's right. Journalists themselves, print journalists, came in, I think, about number six. We also had surgeons on the list, but most surprising of all, perhaps, at least at the time, was, I think, number 7 or 8 was clergy, the church people. Now, at the time, I remember being
any politicians in the survey of yours?
Well, they didn't, and that's actually one of the key points that you need to bear in mind about this is the fact that, for the sake of data cleanliness, I only included professions for which there are over 50 respondents. Okay.
So more than 50 CEOs completed.
They did indeed, yes.
And you discover that there's a preponderance, the most likely profession for a psychopath to do at work is to be a CEO.
Exactly right.
Now, could this be a good thing? Is this what we need, these psychopaths running our companies?
Absolutely.
Or is it a big risk?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both, actually. If you look at the kinds of characteristics that psychopaths have, they are assertive, they don't procrastinate, they don't take things personally, they focus on the positives, they don't beat themselves up when things go wrong, and they're very cool under pressure. They're also not scared to take risks in the right context.
These are all the things that companies train their people
Absolutely
to
right,
do.
absolutely right. And I think we get the wrong kind of end of the stick when we think about psychopaths, and I think this is largely driven by the media. We tend to think of psychopaths, as I was saying, as serial killers and rapists, where actually they have a distinct set of personality characteristics which really can predispose to success in given occupations. Coming back to the church, for instance, why it was no surprise to me actually that there was quite a high preponderance of psychopathic personalities in the church is because what you find is psychopaths tend to thrive in various situations where you've got a power dynamic, where you've got an organisational hierarchy, where things move quickly, where you can play hard and fast with the rules, and to put it crudely, the church is really no different to any other business in that respect.
So they've got these psychopaths leading multinational companies and smaller businesses, medium-sized businesses as well, no doubt. The traits that you just articulated are ones that companies look for often in those leaders. So should we be rejoicing at the fact that these psychopaths are running these companies, or should we be nervous?
I think we should. I think it's a little bit of both. I think there is a point where, if we come back to the mixing desk analogy, I think there is a point where these dials can actually be turned up too high. And of course, what you often find is when psychopaths get into a position of power, often they do abuse that power. So I think what it's a case of closely monitoring the level at which these mixing desk dials are turned up. If you get someone that's taking too many risks, then I think the company's in a bit of trouble. Let's take the financial crisis, for instance. Now, I often use an analogy to explain the financial crisis. Let's say, let's liken the return on, say, investments to the time it takes you to drive a car from A to B down a windy mountain track. Okay, so let's say you get a certain return on your investment for driving from A to B in 1 minute. Well, what might happen is the head of your company might say, okay, if you're one of the drivers, one of the investors, okay, we want to get a bigger investment. We want you to drive down in 55 seconds. So you might be able to do that. Then the next thing is to drive down there in 50 seconds. You might be able to do that. When you start getting faster and faster, what you then start getting are people who are perhaps not actually getting from A to B, but then actually losing control of the car, being, as I say, risk takers, natural risk takers in that job, and going over the edge. So I think what we need to do is have a kind of a monitoring system where you've got people who are taking the right amount of risk, being ruthless and fearless enough, but not flooring it to an extent where the car is actually going over the cliff and everything collapses, which is exactly what happens.
So we need to mitigate against some of these
We
psychopathic
do indeed.
tendencies.
I think that's quite right. And I think there are researchers, Bob Hare, for instance, and Paul Babiak, who are Bob Hare, Canadian researcher, Paul Babiak, a New York industrial psychologist, who are working at the moment, as indeed I am myself, on coming up with a questionnaire that we can give out to various professions, which can kind of almost identify a golden configuration of psychopathic traits, a kind of a golden level, as it were, a golden mean, whereby these kinds of people with that kind of profile are actually optimal performers within that given profession.
Wouldn't the genius of a psychopath be able to see through the questionnaire and answer the questions in ways that would most manage their power and strength?
They would indeed, but actually, when you hand these questionnaires out, what you actually embed in there is a lie detection scale as well. It's called the Marlowe-Crown scale. That's just one of the scales that we can use to embed in these questions. Whereas if people start scoring high on that particular lie subscale, we know that perhaps their answers aren't really worth the paper that they're written on.
Okay, one thing you said at the beginning was that psychopaths tend to lack empathy and they tend to lack morality, if you like. How do we spot those, and what impact does that have on the way businesses are run?
Yeah, I think when we talk about psychopaths lacking empathy, we need to just parse that a little bit. There's actually two kinds of empathy. There's what we call the cold empathy, and there's what we call the hot empathy. Now, cold empathy is the ability to use reason and rational thought to gauge cognitively and dispassionately how another person might be feeling. You don't necessarily feel that in your gut yourself, but you can kind of gauge, you can guess how another person might be feeling. Now, psychopaths, there's evidence to show, actually display more of that cold empathy than the rest of us. As one psychopathic killer I interviewed once put it, you don't need to have colour vision to see how a traffic light works. You just need to know which bits are lit up. And that's exactly how psychopaths, the kind of extreme psychopaths go through, those who are on the spectrum, go through life.
So they can spot people's weaknesses better than others.
That's exactly right, because they see life in emotional black and white, emotional monochrome. And of course that makes them brilliant persuaders, because they can push your buttons without getting caught up in the heat and the light of the situation.
So I say I'm working with a psychopath, or someone I believe to be a psychopath, and they're across the team and they've spotted everyone's weaknesses and they're playing each of us perfectly. What can I do about it?
It's very difficult. I mean, especially if you've got a psychopathic boss. I mean, that's one of the real problems. I think what you've got to try, if you've got a psychopath who's working for you in that kind of situation, you basically need to try to turn his talents outside the organisation. So he's not actually manipulating and using his talents to a deleterious effect within the organisation, but actually there's a way of challenging it so it actually works for the occupation. Okay, I think that's the first thing. If you've got a psychopathic boss, and you're concerned about how you might want to interrelate with him, I think the first thing that you need to do is to absolutely not show any weakness. Psychopaths are brilliant predators. They will prey on anybody who they find vulnerable, and they will push anyone around. Also, if you want to get your ideas through this guy, and it usually is a guy, what you should do is absolutely appeal to his own self-interest. Psychopaths do not do magnanimity, they do not do altruism, they are not generous. If you can appeal to the guy's self-interest to make him look good, and push your ideas at the same time, piggyback on that.
So show no weakness, appeal to his or her, but mainly his self-interest.
Absolutely right.
Anything else? Any other tips?
Yeah, well, I think if things really start getting bad, I think it's probably time to look for another job, actually, because especially if these guys are in absolute power, they will manoeuvre you around. They do play psychological chess with people, and trying to get into a battle with a psychopath is very bad news indeed, especially if they're in positions of power, because they don't abide by the same operational rules that normal people do.
So you usually find you come out the worst from it.
You usually do.
You never win a battle with a psychopath.
Not if they're in positions of power. They possess much more ruthlessness. They possess much.
And
more
if you're a
fearlessness.
leader or manager and you suspect someone in your team is a psychopath, and who's therefore you're not going to get the upward pressure to say this person is not helpful in their role, how can you spot it and what can you do about it?
Well, what you usually find, psychopaths do tend to have a kind of a, especially in middle management, they do tend to have a kind of a telltale kind of profile in the office space. They tend to use blackmail to get what they want, so they usually make it their business to find out precisely what's going on in other people's kinds of areas of control, and use kind of dirty tricks or that kind of stuff to blackmail people. That was exactly not in the management situation, of course, but that was exactly one of Jimmy Savile's tricks of the trade. A lot of the reasons why people who even knew what he was doing didn't come out against him was because he had the dirt on them, especially in various NHS hospitals. So psychopaths are very good at using the dirt against other people to stop them coming out against themselves. Psychopaths also tend to take a lot of credit for other people's work, which they then pass off as their own. They also tend to take, if you've got a psychopath who's dysfunctional, they tend to take a few too many risks as well. And that's something that you need to be on the lookout for as well. So there's kind of 2 or 3 things that you
So it sounds like there are lots of strengths there and some overdone ones, and when we spot them, if we're working for them, we need to appeal to their self-interest, show no weakness. If that doesn't work, just get out of their path.
I think that's absolutely right. One of the things we realise about, we know about psychopaths is that if there is something in it for them, if there is a reward, they do excel. They outperform normal people in terms of whatever context, in terms of investment perhaps, or even in terms of, I've done a lot of work with special
So I might manage them as individual contributors, but not give them people management responsibilities.
That might be a good idea. Yes, that's certainly one angle that you could use. Operationalise their talents so that it's making them look good. And if that's the case, then you can often get a lot more out of a psychopath.
Kevin, thank you so much for your wisdom. And your wisdom of psychopaths is available from all good bookshops, online and offline, but also wisdomofpsychopaths.com. Thank you.
Thank you very much.